Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. In today's show, we look at the ongoing arguments surrounding Chandra Arya's bid to succeed Trudeau. Are his critics merely being racist? A powerful new documentary hits the media covering the events surrounding Najjar's assassination, this time from Al Jazeera, as India's extrajudicial killings go global yet again. And Diljit Dosanjh's new film, Punjab 95, has a release date, but we'll take a look at just what this film really means for the Sikh community. And Donald Trump has made overtures about banning Tik Tok. Social media has of course been an important platform for the Khalistan struggle, so what impact will this have going forward? Well, all this and more on today's show, but joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus. I hope you're doing well on that side of the pond, and welcome back to all of our amazing viewers. Thanks. I've noticed many great comments out there, so keep them coming.
Indeed. And James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And yes, we will indeed be taking a look at loads of your great comments which have been filling it below the videos. So thank you very much indeed for those. So James, let's get things started. What are you going to begin the show with this morning?
Well, Chandra is getting a bit of backlash on his desires and his dreams to lead Canada. And it is a balancing act to look through the critics that are coming out online. And I would even go as far as to say the critics and the trolls. When he announced his running, of course, he has come up with some controversial platforms, including the introduction or the expansion of things like nuclear fission power and salt mines and all that sort of thing. But what's happening now is that people are looking online and responding to his posts on Twitter and other platforms. And he says that he wants to lead a smaller, more efficient government to rebuild the nation and secure prosperity for future generations. And this comes in stark contrast to the perception of his potential involvement with the foreign interference inquiry. We know that his name has floated around a lot. We know that he went and met Prime Minister Modi in India after Justin Trudeau had called out the Modi government as potentially involved in the Najjar killing, as well as other interference and extrajudicial killings. So it's getting a lot of backlash that he is seeing. Now, some people are upset about the fact that he has been in Canada since he was in his 40s. So he has been here for some time, but at the same time, they question how he was able 14 years ago, or 12 years ago, sorry, to land a position as an MP. Now, of course, the riding in Nepean has a large Indian diaspora, so that's not surprising. And the fact that he came out with a lot of policies that really coattailed on the liberal popularity at the time. So those are different things that factored into it. But now, of course, with the expansion of the probes into foreign interference, that has become a big Achilles heel for him and his links to the BJP government as well as the RSS. Now, of course, this will play out in terms of the next election, but how much is the big question? With the current leadership in place at this time, they are claiming that there's not going to be a major overhaul of election processes and the leadership race when it comes to foreign interference before the 2025 election. This, of course, is a major concern to many people. And of course, it's also a concern that we don't anticipate the government or any government agencies such as CSIS or the RCMP to be releasing the names of those suspected of involvement within the foreign interference inquiry. Now, this, of course, is a delicate balancing act because of the fact that if they are not proven guilty at this time, to release the names could cause irreparable harm towards the MPs or potential candidates as far as it goes there in the leadership race, but also in the election. We know that there's been major foreign interference linked to the Conservative leadership race in the past two runnings, and one of those, of course, resulted in Pierre Poilievre taking the lead of the Conservatives. So without the government taking further steps to really crack down on foreign interference prior to the 2025 election, it is really a balancing act to figure out for the voters that don't have all of the information that they should. Without that information, Canadians are kind of blindfolded throughout the election and not able to make a properly informed decision. And that is just not right when it comes to the elections and the democratic process. Another name that's being thrown around is Anita Anand. However, she has stated that she is not interested in running for the leadership of the Liberal Party. But again, her name is still being tossed around. Whether or not anybody comes forward to convince her to run is another story, and we'll see how that plays out. Now, she's been an MP since 2019. She is well respected in the fact that she has held some positions of power and leading several ministries, including the Ministry of Transportation. So she does have much more experience in the broader scope of government as well as running ministries, whereas Mr. Arya may not have that. And I don't think that he has the same confidence of the Liberal Party members or the Canadian public. So I don't think that he's going to be a serious contender. But with foreign interference at play and the lack of crackdown, that could be a real interesting race to watch, Angus. It is the big news across Canada with Trudeau stepping down, with the race heating up. And as we spoke about in previous episodes, there are other names that are being thrown around in that race. And so far, my personal pick or my personal favorite in that race would be Christy Clark, sorry. And that's only because being in the West, I know her track record, I know her dedication, her openness to all communities, but she also has an opportunity for the Sikh community because she is very invested in the Surrey area, where, of course, we have a very large Sikh diaspora, and she has very good working relations with them. So we'll watch and see. But again, it should be a concern to Canadians that there's not a crackdown on foreign interference prior to the election. It should be a concern that the names have not been released. And I personally am going to go on and start a petition on the issue that I think that all names of potential involvement of foreign interference should be released before the election is called. And we'll release that information once I get that petition set up, because I think that is a very important issue for all Canadians to know, whether it is foreign interference from India, China, Iran, Russia. I mean, the list goes on, and we cannot afford to allow that foreign interference to dictate our policy, our government, and our future as Canadians, Angus.
Yes, I think we'll keep an eye out for that petition, and I think that's a great idea. But it's pretty fundamental. Of course, we need transparency in politics. It's how on earth can a democracy remain healthy if there is a lack of transparency? Let me preface my sort of thoughts on this with, I suppose, the first question: does it matter? I mean, how important is this? Whoever is going to take over leadership of this party? Now, in reality, it's likely, according to the polls, whoever takes over leadership of the Liberal Party is not going to be Prime Minister probably at the end of this year. It is likely to be somebody else. Yeah. What this position really is going to end up looking like by the end of this year is probably the leader of the opposition. So that we've got to say everything that we talk about in context of that. No, but of course it does matter who stands in opposition. They have got to take, almost by definition, an opposing view to whoever the prevailing Prime Minister is, so democracy can then function properly and remain healthy. So if it is likely that the Conservative Party, as according to the polls, is the most likely to be the next government, then of course whoever opposes the Conservative government should stand for the interests of those who oppose those very policies of the Conservative Party. So the big question is, does Chandra Arya represent those? We don't know. I think that's what we need to examine. And whoever potentially replaces Trudeau will need to be held accountable and represent the very interests of the people that, of course, will vote for that party. And, of course, not just the interests of people who vote for the Liberal Party, it's for everybody else who didn't vote Conservative, assuming it's a Conservative government. So it's quite a broad church, in other words. In other words, they've got to represent a very large percentage of Canadians. And in fact, probably, if it runs in the same way as just about every other democratic election, the majority of Canadians, because of course most governments are not voted in by the majority of people, it just happens to be the majority of voters, and it is the party that had the most votes. So there's a very subtle nuance to that, but it's an important nuance. In other words, whoever is elected to this position potentially represents the majority of Canadians, which of course covers all sorts of people, all minorities, and all sorts, as I say, a very broad church of people. So now the big issue here is whoever does take over, they have to represent the best interests of Canada and the best interests of those people I've been talking about. And this is where it becomes very relevant if there are outside interests, malign interests. And of course, we're talking about India. And the evidence has been pretty clear that Chandra Arya has been influenced by India. He's only arrived in Canada relatively recently, at a relatively late age. And of course, people are calling this out. This has nothing to do with racism. It is a very valid criticism. He could have come from anywhere in the world. But if that carries with it baggage, in other words, a potential for external influence, then it is a very valid criticism in any democracy to say, are you actually representing the best interests of your host nation, or are you actually representing an agenda of somebody else, of a different nation? And I think that is a valid accusation against Chandra Arya, because the evidence, as we've laid out on many occasions, and of course many outlets, many news outlets, and particularly the Sikh community have laid out, there is a lot of evidence to say he is actually pushing a Hindutva agenda, an agenda rolled out from the RSS in India. So I think that the criticisms against Arya are very, very valid. So I think as I started this message really with the idea that the comment that it's about transparency, and I think you're absolutely right, James. I think it's absolutely critical that whoever takes leadership of any political party, and indeed any MP, any member of Parliament, at whatever level, whether it's junior, a minister, or the very leader himself or herself, they have their background, their interests have to be utterly transparent, because without that, democracy fails. Because if it turns out, as has often been the case, sadly, is all sorts of dirty little stories appear subsequently, people say, well, hang on, how on earth was this guy elected or this person elected? How on earth have they been given a responsible role to govern a nation if this news has come out subsequently? Had we known this news, there's no way we would have elected this person. That's why it's so important. There must be complete and utter transparency. Now, of course, people have a right to privacy. Yes, there is a line there, and of course nobody in the right mind would want to push into those boundaries of privacy. We all deserve a private life. But when it goes beyond just simple domestic private arrangements, if it involves external influences, as has clearly been the case, and this inquiry in Canada has revealed, there have been an awful lot of external influences, whether financial or incentive-wise, or through bullying or harassment or intimidation or threats. There has been a clear, very clear influence coming from various nations, which of course are Russia, China, but most importantly for us, India. There has been Indian influence in Canadian politics, whether it's a Conservative Party or elsewhere, certainly within academia, as we've highlighted regularly. In other words, India is influencing society and politics, and indeed even economics in Canada. There must be complete transparency. It is absolutely vital that we push for that the people of Canada push for that, because there is no way we can have a functioning, healthy democracy in Canada without it, James.
Absolutely, Angus. And when we talk about the opposition from the general public online, just to close out that story, I'll show a clip of, or just a statement of one individual who had posted to X. And his name is Chris Brunette. He went on to say, this dude moved to Canada at the age of 43, speaks broken English with a thick Indian accent, and yet is somehow an MP and running to be the next prime minister. Imagine I moved to Mumbai, took an introductory course on how to speak Gujarati, and then ran to replace Modi. So I think that his feelings are quite well stated there, but I also think that there is a tone to racism in some of the opposition that I'm seeing on social media. Now, as we take a look at social media, that leads us right into our next story, Angus, and the importance of social media when it comes to elections and just sharing of information around the world has become more and more prevalent. And this includes TikTok, of course, and the clock is now ticking on them. They may go dark as soon as Sunday in the United States, as that is the deadline for the Supreme Court to make a decision on whether or not to ban it outright in the U.S. Now, this ban would take effect the day before Trump gets inaugurated, and one of his campaign promises was to save TikTok. Whether or not that's going to happen is still up in the air, as he and several other politicians at the federal level in the U.S. are asking the courts to postpone any decision to allow Trump time to take office and to make changes to allow TikTok to continue. Now, with that said, of course, if they do go dark, that's going to leave another platform just out of the cycle. You're not going to be able to download it on Apple or on Android phones. You're not going to be able to get it in the app stores. You may be able to get it for your desktop, but that's a totally different user experience. And the fact that you would have to look at utilizing a VPN. Now, VPNs are great, but they also come with security risks. And that is the reason why the US wants to ban TikTok to start with, is because of the security risk that they feel it imposes with the alleged control and ownership of the China government and the access to classified, or shouldn't say classified, but private data, and how that's being utilized. They are also concerned about the utilization by China to hack into different user accounts or into people's computers to start stealing any other information relevant to any type of spy network or such that they may be running. So it's a really big issue, because at the face of it, you think, well, that app is, just there. If it's gone, it's gone. But the fact that over 170 million users are logged on with TikTok, and that becomes a very, very large source of information for many people. So if it does go ahead and get banned, then there are options for Trump to try to bring it back, but that's going to be a process. It's going to put him against the Supreme Court decision, and it's going to cost money of the taxpayers, once again spending money where he's supposed to be saving it. So that becomes another concern. Now, recently, Bloomberg News actually reported that Musk may be in the running to buy TikTok. And TikTok came out and said absolutely untrue, absolutely no way are they ever going to do a deal with Musk. They are very steadfast in retaining ownership of TikTok. And if that means phasing it out in the US, if that means it going completely dark, then that's what they're willing to do at this point and not send it over. Other people who could be interested, though, with Amazon is Walmart, interested in TikTok would be Amazon, Walmart, Oracle. These are all platforms that are looking at the value of the data that comes through ownership of TikTok, but also the value in expanding the social shopping. And essentially, that is a very large growing market where people can click on the videos to actually purchase things through that marketplace network. And that has a very high dollar value, and it's expected to really, really take off further. So the, companies like Walmart that could utilize that to increase their sales are exponential. So we'll watch and see about that. Microsoft has in the past put out feelers and has shown express interest in buying TikTok in the past or having some type of partnership and investment. So we'll wait and see as well. So there are different options available, but we also need to keep in mind that, as I said, they are concerned about TikTok being used to interfere and cause undue influence on the American public, that data could be used improperly, and about misinformation being spread, which is quite ironic in the fact that Twitter doesn't do fact checking, and now Facebook has removed from their platforms fact checking as well, and are going to leave it to the audience or the users to flag things. So really, it's the pot calling the kettle black, Angus. In fact, I think that there's a much higher risk with the removal of those checks and balances with the other platforms than there is with TikTok, in my opinion, Angus.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, I am really the last person on earth to sort of commentate knowledgeably about social media. I'm certainly not on TikTok. I struggle with Facebook, and I just about get the hang of X. But certainly TikTok. I've never really dabbled too much in TikTok. To me, TikTok still represents just videos for the young generation of silly dances and silly songs and nonsense, really. But that's probably more my naivety than anything else. I think what is important here is I think there are two elements to this. Firstly, there is a definite danger from China and these sorts of apps in terms of spying, privacy, passing of information and intelligence across to China. But ultimately, as the other side of this is, of course, there's also the US-owned giant tech companies, Facebook, Meta, and Google, YouTube, etc., who actually, in my opinion, and X, of course, who actually are probably the greater danger to democracy and the normal functioning of information and the passage of information. I think TikTok is a little bit lightweight, in my opinion. I don't think anything too heavyweight in terms of influencing political opinion passes through TikTok. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but that's certainly my perspective. I would say X and Facebook and Instagram to a lesser degree appear to probably have a greater influence on the larger voting public, should we say. Having said that, TikTok is... I think there's very easy. There is actually a very easy win, I would say, for the US on this one. Again, looking at it very simplistically, if they ban TikTok, Elon Musk doesn't have to buy TikTok. He just sets up his own, and of course he's got a bit of an open goal there, because if TikTok's banned in the US and Elon Musk comes up with his own version, the US-based version, then of course everybody's saying, well, fine, I'll just use Elon Musk as long as its functionality is the same. It doesn't matter if it says TikTok on it. He can call it Tactic, or whatever. There you go. I'll put it quickly. Patent that name, but he can call it whatever he wants and set up a US version, and there you go, you've got a sanitized, safe US version of TikTok, so there's nothing stopping him there. But I think you're right there, James. I think the bigger danger here really comes from the other platforms, but these platforms are so important for spreading the message of minorities. Of course, no longer do we have such a reliance on what we used to call the mainstream media. You go back 20, 30 years ago, we all got our news from the television news, really, or the radio news. Nowadays, the mainstream news is no longer, or the mainstream media is no longer the mainstream, as it's now being called. It's called the legacy media. In other words, it's a dinosaur. It's history now. The young generation, particularly, and increasingly even the middle age and people like ourselves, James, we're getting more and more of our news and indeed our entertainment not from the mainstream media outlets. It is from the likes of social media and the streaming services, etc., in which actually I think, as this article referred to, the Wild West, it is a lot less controlled. It is a lot more open. It is open to abuse. But the advantage is, of course, it's a double-edged sword. The downside is, there's an awful lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of bad actors spreading bad information, misinformation, deliberate campaigns, as we've talked about on regular occasions. For example, the Hindutva bots that exist out there in the Hindutva army spreading misinformation. But the upside of this, the positive side of these unregulated or relatively unregulated platforms, is it means that minorities can get their message out there. It means that people otherwise without a voice, who were otherwise kept out of mainstream media in the old days, can now find an audience, albeit a small audience, but if their message is valid, if their message is powerful enough, it starts to grow and reach a wider audience, where otherwise they would have been blocked from reaching that global audience. And likewise, the audience is no longer restricted to the broad broadcast capability of a TV channel or a radio show. It's now literally global. If it's on the internet, it means the world is your audience. There is 8 billion people out there potentially, or whoever has access to the internet is your potential audience. So the world is your oyster, as they say. So I think this is almost, I would say it's almost a distraction. It's almost an irrelevance banning TikTok. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people clearly use it, but ultimately I think there are bigger fish to fry. I think there are bigger dangers out there that need to be looked at very carefully. I've always been very distrustful, should we say, of Silicon Valley, of the likes of Google, the likes of Facebook, Meta, because they very strongly control the narrative. We saw it through COVID. We see it regularly through elections. We certainly saw it when Donald Trump was the last president, and when he left his presidency, that this tsunami of propaganda that came out, the false information, the links to Russia, etc., which were subsequently proven to be false, they were all perpetuated. All this misinformation was perpetuated across social media. Likewise, we see it with the Sikh community. There is so much misinformation that perpetuates across social media. We do know that India has this massive resource of $450 million a year to fund misinformation, to fund their campaign, their RSS Hindutva agenda across social media, across academia, across politics. We've talked about interference in foreign affairs and foreign politics. This is the fund that they have to spread their agenda. And of course, a lot of that money is spent across social media. So, and they probably do use TikTok to some degree, but they primarily use the likes of Facebook and certainly X to a large degree. So this is really where we need to focus our attention on, James. I think that is, as you rightly say, I think that is probably the bigger danger to democracy and society. And I think that's really where we should be focusing on.
Absolutely, Angus. And the screenshot that's there, that is some of my personal TikTok there. And so I use it quite often. And, these nature videos and that don't really get a lot of views sometimes. Sometimes they go exponential. But the importance for what I was using it for, what I really got on board with, was my ability to share information directly and live when I was covering the war in Ukraine. So while I was in Ukraine, I was able to post videos, get information out there in real time. And some of those videos went 3.4 million views. So it definitely is a tool to ensure that there is truth for independent journalists, regardless as to whether we're here in Canada or if I'm overseas covering important issues. So to lose it, I think, really has an impact. And you look at other social media platforms such as Truth Social, which I happen to get blocked on and kicked off of today because I called out some of the misinformation on the firefighting that several politicians in the U.S. were spreading, and it was out misinformation. I called them out on it, and I got banned. Go figure.
James, and I think that sums up the problem with social media is whoever controls the platform controls the narrative, and that is the danger with all these platforms. Right. And we've often talked, it's like us being demonetized on YouTube because essentially we're sending out a narrative that contradicts the Indian narrative. We know we're banned in India, well, go figure, as you say, but likewise being demonetized on YouTube, again, because the Indian diaspora have a lot of infiltrated agents within Google, so they essentially control YouTube as well. So anytime you go up against India, you're going to get demonetized and eventually probably banned. So that is part of the danger. So yeah, as I say, you control the platform, you control the narrative. That's what we need to be very aware of. So, okay, James, let's move on then to my first story, and let's follow this theme of the media and controlling narratives. And India has been at great pains to obviously control the narrative across the media, and it does its absolute best to control the narrative globally. Of course, it controls the complete narrative in India. The Godi media portrays only one side, but globally they struggle because, of course, the democratic world particularly has the ability to argue against and produce a counter narrative, and there's nothing they can do about it. And I'm delighted to say that the story of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and his assassination by India, and certainly Indian agents, has been widely reported, of course, across the Western world, and certainly the Five Eyes nations have reported it regularly and talked about it. It remains in the news. But I'm delighted to say that Al Jazeera from the Middle East, they have actually just released a new podcast over the last day or two. 12th of January, they released a documentary entitled True Crime Podcast, The Khalistan Assassinations. This is a podcast, it's a video basically, it's a video documentary that's about half an hour long. And they go, it's an in-depth documentary about the whole Hardeep Singh Nijjar story. And they label it, I'll just quickly read the description about it. It says, a murder that rocked the Sikh community in British Columbia. Hardeep Singh Nijjar, a prominent Sikh leader, was fatally shot in his car just after leaving his local temple in 2023. This wasn't just another crime. It was an event that would spark international tension and raise alarming questions. Who assassinated Hardeep? Did the orders come from the Indian government itself? Wow. So again, mainstream, talk about mainstream media, but this is certainly this is one of the largest news outlets in the Middle East that is actually broadcast globally as well across various channels. This is Al Jazeera asking this question: did the orders come from the Indian government itself? So even in the Middle East, this very same question is being asked. This is fantastic. Now, Al Jazeera has over 15 million subscribers. This is how widely this message is going. So 15 million subscribers to Al Jazeera. That's a potential audience seeing this documentary. And as of last night, so I'm going back, 12, 16 hours ago, this video had seen 45,000 views. It had only been posted up about 6 hours earlier. So within 6 hours, this documentary had 45,000 views. So talking about spreading information, spreading the truth, spreading a counter-narrative, that's how powerful this is. So this documentary, I mean, I have to say, I did watch a documentary, fabulously produced, really good. It interviewed a couple of people who expressed their opinion. They were Giorgio Shani. He's a professor of politics and international studies at a university in Japan. And it did also actually interview Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon. Of course, Gurpatwant we talk about regularly, the leader of the Sikhs for Justice and one of the co-founders of the referendum, the Khalistan referendum. So the documentary took opinions and commentary from both those individuals, but it was it also had a lot of AI images, a little bit of footage, but more importantly, it just followed the whole story of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, but it also went back through a lot of the history. It put it into context. It talked about 1984. It originally started, it actually went all the way back to partition, 1947. It gave a brief summarised history of the Sikh struggle. Really important this. Don't forget the audience, how big this audience is, who are learning, who are being educated about the Sikh struggle from, I would have to say, a pretty independent viewpoint. It was a very balanced viewpoint. It was a very truthful viewpoint. There was no agenda, certainly apparent in this documentary. But it did set out the Sikh struggle from 1947. It covered in depth Operation Blue Star in 1984. It covered the genocide. It referred to the word genocide of November 1984, subsequent to the assassination of Indira Gandhi. It did talk about the 1985 Air India bombing. However, it did show an article blaming the Sikh militants, as they call it, sadly. So there was, no malice in that. I think they were just reproducing material that is in the public domain where it blamed the Sikh community, which is the current narrative, which, of course, we are countering regularly, saying it wasn't the Sikh community. We believe it was Indian intelligence behind that. But anyway, it talked about, and then it looked more closely at the Canadian population and the Indian diaspora in Canada, particularly the Sikh diaspora. And then it looked at Nijjar's life story. It talked about how he moved to Canada. Then talked about how India put up a reward for Nijjar, and then of course it then talked about, in detail, it talked about the operation to assassinate Nijjar. And in amongst this, it took all sorts of information from Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon, who of course knew Nijjar very well, and he of course had his opportunity to put his side of the story. But then it also did talk about the Department of Justice investigation into Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon himself, and again, so his story was brought in, again bringing in this wider context of Indian transnational oppression and this operation, and always by implication saying it was probably coming from the Indian government to attack the Khalistan movement. So again, the narrative was very powerful here and very good for the whole movement. And of course, the speculation came, could the orders have come from the Indian government? It didn't come to any conclusion because, of course, it can't come to a conclusion. It doesn't have the evidence yet. That evidence resides, obviously, with intelligence services in North America. But it did ask the question. And the fact that they're even asking the question is significant in itself. It is raising that possibility, that implication, to a very, very large global audience. So again, it's all about recruiting people into alignment, into this perception of India not being a democracy anymore. It is bringing people into this alignment of belief that India is actually a nation that is running out of accountability, running out of the rule of law, and running out of democracy, and in fact aligning with more rogue states like China and Russia and of course Iran. And it does then say, the question is, so what now? What about going forward? Well, it talked about, obviously, the diplomatic spat between Canada and India, and, of course, Trudeau standing up public. And it actually said the fact that Trudeau stood up so publicly to make this accusation in itself sent out a very powerful message. More than anything, it sent out the fact that there is no way, as the documentary speculated, there is no way that Trudeau, the leader of a nation, would stand up so publicly and accuse India of this act without having credible evidence. And that's what they said. They said that he must have credible evidence that he obviously couldn't reveal at the time, that India were behind this. There's no way otherwise he would have said that. So again, a very powerful message. And I just want to I'll play the conclusion for you. I think the conclusion really sums up this documentary beautifully. Have a listen to this.
And that Indian government agents are involved in a campaign of violence against dissidents. They expelled 6 Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner.
I think over the long term, the big victims of this are the Sikh community within Canada itself. I think they are seen as expendable, but they are a sizable and significant minority.
Because at the centre of this international diplomatic war, a family and a community has been ripped apart. Hardeep leaves behind a loving wife and 2 sons who've said throughout they believe the Indian government was involved in his death.
He was a very strong man, very brave, who would take a bullet for the community, and he did take a bullet.
Hardeep's eldest son is just 21. At a memorial marking the anniversary of his father's murder, he tells reporters in 2023, Sikhs all around the world believe this is not the end. This is just the first step. And hopefully, Mr. Trudeau and the rest of the Canadian leaders take a stand.
Wow. I mean, what a powerful message on what a powerful platform. That is Al Jazeera with 15 million subscribers. And I say that video has been watched at least 45,000 times. And that was 12, 18 hours ago. So it's great to see that, James. Fantastic that another mainstream news outlet, and this time in the Middle East, has picked up this story. This is so damaging for India, but it is so powerful for the Khalistan movement. It's powerful for the Sikh community. And you just can't buy publicity like that, James.
Absolutely, and it's nice to see them make mention of Nijar's oldest son there. He is, I think that Hardeep, in watching over him from wherever he is, I think that he would be very proud of his oldest son. He's kind of taking a step back. He knows the pressure and the stress that it put on his father to lead that campaign and to be such a public person. So, he's taking a step back, but he's also standing up for his father, and really, it appears that he's really there for his mother too, and really helping the family to get through this. So I think that Hardeep would be very proud of his sons and his family on how they are getting through this horrible event, Angus.
Indeed. So let's move on to my second story. And again, we're staying with the media. Again, we're talking about getting the message across. Well, of course, there are 2 sides battling this propaganda war. This war of information and misinformation. Of course, we've been talking about our side, the truthful side, setting out actually what's really going on. But of course, we are up against this enormously powerful media machine of India. And of course, it has been very active recently, particularly with the whole narrative of what happened across the Punjab. Well, obviously since 1947, but particularly in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, one of the the key figures that we've often talked about during that period was, of course, the Shaheed Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra. This was the gentleman who fought so hard to highlight the extrajudicial killings that occurred during the 1980s and 1990s, and he collated an enormous amount of evidence, pointing to the perpetrators of those mass murders of the young Sikh generation across that time. And for his troubles and for highlighting, he stood up, of course, in front of the Canadian Parliament to highlight to the Western world for the first time just what India, the Indian state, had been up to, this mass murder, this genocide of the Sikh population in the Punjab at the time. He himself was extrajudicially killed. He was kidnapped by the police and he was tortured and then he was murdered and he was martyred, he was shahided. And so, of course, as we've talked about on regular occasions, there is a film being made about this called Punjab 95, starring, yes, Diljit Dosanjh, this character that we even talked about just the other day. And there's been a lot of controversy about this story. This film, which has been put together, has really struggled to be produced because, of course, it's tried to tell the real story, the truth about what happened during that period, and, of course, the truth about the man himself, about Shahid Singh Kalra, and what he fought for, what he represented, particularly because he was a very strong advocate for Khalistan. That is a message that they are trying so hard to bury. But this film was all about, the whole purpose of this film was to try to highlight the fact that he was a Khalistani, highlight the fact that so many of the Sikh youth were murdered in cold blood through extrajudicial killing. So, of course, the Indian state has been fighting tooth and nail to stop this message, this narrative being portrayed in this film. We've talked about in the past how the censors have been working overtime to force cuts to this film, to even change the name of the actual main person, Singh Kalra himself, to try and fudge the fact that it was about Kalra, and even change the name of Punjab 95 to something else, again to try and distract from the truth of what it was all about. But anyway, of course it did star Diljit Dosanjh. Now this character is somebody who I showed just a few days ago, cozying up to Narendra Modi, backslapping with Narendra Modi, saying what a great job Narendra Modi was doing, what a great advocate for everything Narendra Modi is. And likewise, Modi was saying, oh yes, you're a great Sikh, you represent all the wonderful things in life, etc., etc. It was disgusting. It was an appalling, cringe-making festival of mutual backslapping by two pretty, I would say, relatively odious characters. And of course, Diljit Dosanjh, as we'll talk about in our comments, he has received a lot of critical comments about his cozying up to Modi, and of course accusations of being a false Sikh and this sort of stuff. Well, he did announce, and of course we've now finally got to this point of the release of this film. We thought it was going to take time. Well, it has taken time, and Diljit Dosanjh posted up on X yesterday that yes, the release date is in February. He was not more specific than that. He just said it will be in February. In other words, next month this film is finally going to be released. And indeed, across Indian media, the Godi media, they said yes, the film's coming up. And there's a lot of sort of fanfare saying this great film is going to be released. Well, immediately you got to be suspicious. Well, why would the Godi media be so celebrating about a film that's actually going to highlight something that is a dirty stain on Indian history? It's going to highlight the dreadful deeds of the Indian government. There's no way the Godi media would celebrate a film like that. Well, let's dig a little deeper. So, for example, the Times of India talk about Punjabi superstar Diljit Dosanjh, who's been setting the house on fire with his Dilluminati tour, shared the first look from his upcoming movie Punjab 95. And it said Diljit took to Instagram, shared an array of pictures in which he can be seen in his character from the film. And he wrote, I challenge the darkness, Punjab 95. And then in the first image, he's seen sitting on the floor in a raw and rugged look, dressed in a simple kurta and turban. His blooded and bruised face conveys a powerful sense of pain and resilience. Ooh, I mean, gosh, how dramatic is this? And it says the film is based on the life of human rights activist Jaswant Singh Kalra, etc., etc. So, okay, that's the Godi media take on this. And again, immediately you've got to think, now we haven't seen this film. We don't know actually what this film's going to be like. But I think the very fact that the Godi media is getting excited about the launch of this film, I think tells you this film is not going to be what we thought it would be. Surprise, surprise. It's likely that there is going to be cut to the core. Any reference, of course, to anything that bears the truth is going to, of course, be either distracted or certainly cut. It looks like the censors have won. There is no way this film would have passed the censorship in India if it portrayed the truth, if it actually portrayed genuinely what happened in the 1980s and 90s in Punjab. So I uncovered a very interesting article in Baz, written, this article, and I think this says it all, this article was written 3 years ago by Shamsha Singh. I met Shamsha last Thursday, actually. He's a very solid fellow. He's written a lot of very powerful articles. He works for Sikh Youth Federation UK, and he's written a lot for Baz News, and is an extraordinarily knowledgeable chap. He really knows his stuff, as they say. And he's done an awful lot of research. His background knowledge of the movement, of the Khalistan movement, the whole Sikh community, and of course the history of the Sikh community. He is an encyclopedia of this knowledge. And he does write regular, really powerful articles, and of course well-researched, truthful articles. And he wrote this 3 years ago, and I'm just going to cherry pick some bits of information that he wrote about this film, even when this film was in its early stages. This filming hadn't even started. They were still just talking about this film. And this is what he said 3 years ago. And again, I'll just pick out lots of things, but he questioned this whole narrative. Basically, he set up the scene saying, look, do you honestly think this powerfully controlled media machine of India is going to let the truth be revealed? Bollywood, the Indian film industry, there is absolutely no way that the Indian film industry is going to produce a film that holds up its own state and its own government to account. There is no way that the censorship board will let any film, whether independently produced or through Bollywood or whatever, there's no way the censorship board, which of course by extension is going to be controlled by the Indian government and the Indian state, and of course by that I mean Brahmanical control, there's no way the censorship board will pass a film that actually damages the Indian state, that promotes secessionism, talks about Khalistan, or indeed tells the truth of those dreadful extrajudicial genocides that occurred during the 1980s and 1990s. And so a lot of that article refers to that whole narrative, saying that there's no way this film could be made if it was going to be genuine. And he also says how they frame Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh. And he talks about, he says, to refer to Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh as an Indian, because they of course they refer to him as an Indian activist. He wasn't an Indian activist. He was a Punjabi Khalistani activist. Yet again, they're trying to frame him as an Indian activist. And again, they're trying to frame him to say that he wasn't actually highlighting the sins of the Indian state. And in fact, the real perpetrator of this, which is the Indian government, he was fighting against general human rights for Indians. In other words, they diluted that message that he was actually trying to portray. Excuse me. So he says, to refer to Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh as an Indian, to speak about his death without explicit reference to the violence of the Indian state, to erase the Panth's bestowed title of Shahid is an injustice to his life and legacy. These dynamics will undoubtedly be recreated in any mainstream film about Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh. The story will become one of loyalty to human rights, reforming the state, and any violence will be about individual corrupt officers. The role of the state erased. Exactly. So in other words, what's being said here is there's no way that the Indian state will allow a film that specifically holds up the Indian state guilty. Instead, they will dilute that message, saying they'll make it a lot more general. Oh, it was about individual corrupt officers, about these bad individuals. It was about the bad apples, not the fact that there was a systemic state problem that was going on. It was the state and the government against the Sikh community. Bhai Jaswant Singh Ji founded and edited a monthly magazine called Liberation Khalistan to advocate for the body he set up in the UK, the Khalistan Liberation Organisation. The predominant narrative around Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh that exists within mainstream Sikh memorialisation is that of an apolitical human rights activist. This narrative falls apart when one asks why human rights were being violated and by whom. So again, the message is from Shamsha that Bhai Jaswant Singh Ji actually founded a Khalistan movement. He founded a monthly magazine. He founded a Khalistan organisation, a pro-Khalistan organisation. But all that is lost. The Indian state buries that message, that information. They say he was just a human rights activist. He was an Indian human rights activist. They're trying to remove the fact that he was a Khalistani, because there's no way they want the fact that a Khalistani supporter is portrayed as a hero, as some sort of heroic figure. And this again aligns with this typical Indian state methodology. They're trying to hide the fact that anybody heroic fighting for human rights is in fact a Khalistani, is in fact fighting for the Khalistan movement. The Indian movie industry, from Bollywood to Punjabi films, have largely perpetuated stereotypes about the Punjabi Sikh identity, from Sardar jokes to casting Sikhs as loyal Indian patriots. diluting our mass consciousness about our true identity, praxis and struggle. As such, the Indian film industry partakes in the project of nation building, which is inherently incapable of challenging India itself. When Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh Ji stood in opposition to India and was ultimately killed for his support of the demonised Khalistani, will this film name the actual struggle against an India that continues to subjugate Sikhs? No chance. Yes, again, is talking about the fact that there's no the Indian media machine, Bollywood, and even Punjabi films. Again, we talked about this in the past. Even Punjabi films try to say Sikhs are loyal Indian patriots. Again, they're trying to get this across this narrative that Sikhs don't want Khalistan. They don't want to be separate. They are part of a loyal, patriotic Indian nation. That's the narrative they're trying to portray. That is not true. The trouble is, it's the young generation that are watching these films, that believe these films, that think, okay, well, I'm a loyal Indian then. If that's what the rest of my fellow Punjabis and fellow Sikhs must believe, then I must be a loyal Indian citizen, not a secessionist, not loyal to Khalistan as my parents are or my grandparents are. That is this insidious methodology that the media are using, the mainstream media in India are using. They're trying to influence the next generation to say, you will be a loyal Indian citizen. This is how they work. You will not be a Khalistani supporter. That's what they're trying to achieve here. It's very insidious and very devious. And again, I refer back to 1930s Germany. This is what the 1930s German media machine also portrayed when it talked about the Hitler Youth. It indoctrinated the people of Germany. It indoctrinated the young generation into, you are all loyal Nazis. You will follow the Nazi machine. Anybody who opposes this is a terrorist, they're a militant, they are an outsider, they are the minority. So again, this is reflecting that same methodology that the Nazis used in 1930s Germany. Then he talks about Diljit Dosanjh himself. He's an actor, a mere puppeteer in the film industry. I don't think he's a puppeteer, I think he is the puppet, who's asked to memorise, act and repeat a series of lines. In many ways, he embodies a caricature of what it means to be a Sikh. In other words, he's a fake Sikh. He's this artificial construct of what the Indian state want a Sikh to be. He is their moulded model of what they want a Sikh to be, a loyal Indian citizen. Not a Khalistani, not an independent thinking, free-thinking, democratic supporter of injustice, etc., but indeed a loyal subject, an indoctrinated subject of India. In many ways, he does embody a caricature of what it means to be a Sikh. Social and political uproar could pressure Diljit to refuse the role, only for someone else to be selected. So this is true. So Diljit has actually just gone along and said, well, okay, look, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it, so I may as well do it. So he's just looking out for himself. He's sold his soul because he just thinks, well, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. The only actor who recently questioned what it means to embody the Sikh struggle was, of course, Deep Sidhu. What happened to Deep Sidhu? His death is viewed as another state-orchestrated political murder of a young Sikh who vocalised and raised Sikh consciousness for Khalistan. Due to the nature of Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh's life and death and the reality of India, the Indian film industry is only capable of recreating, mutilating and co-opting a story about Khalistan and the Sikh struggle against India in an attempt to infiltrate and divert ongoing discourse and rising Sikh consciousness. All of this raises questions about the intentions of this film, the diluted messages that this film will spread, the co-option of the Sikh struggle for Khalistan. Although the film's optics may appeal to some, we have a separate set of coordinates to truly honour our Shaheeds, which is the seemingly harder work. In other words, look, we will honour our Shaheeds in our own way. We don't respect and we don't acknowledge the way that Bollywood and the Indian state try to honour our Shaheeds. You're doing it your way, in your own co-opted way, in your own fake way. You're remoulding it, you're reframing it into something that suits your narrative. But it's not the truth. The Sikh community will honour their Shaheeds in their own way, in the way that is right. This work means deeply engaging with their actual politics, organising and showing up in your locales, nurturing the dreams for liberation Khalistan. The conditions of the Indian state are such that no film on Jaswant Singh could ever capture the politics and struggle of such a Shaheed. Other films that attempted to speak about Punjab and Sikh liberation, either vaguely based on the movement or on key figures, erase central aspects of the struggle, particularly by invisibilising Khalistan. Absolutely. In other words, you can't talk about Khalistan. You can't have anything that supports or highlights the fact that there is a huge support for Khalistan. Otherwise, it will never get past the census. These films were made by Sikhs, but in order to receive approval for distribution, they had to pass Indian Censor Board approval, which, as a state political entity, does not allow counter-state narratives. So again, stating what we've been talking about. It must be understood there can be no creative or intellectual freedom, which is essential to public discourse and our liberation. Within the confines of the Indian state, India routinely engages in censorship, imprisons artists, journalists, climate rights activists, human rights defenders, and sought to viciously annihilate all militant resistance to its power. Even Indian liberals consistently demise Khalistan and uphold its erasure. So that's a brilliant article by Shamsher Singh in Baz News from 3 years ago. So even 3 years ago, he realised what was going to happen with this. He totally understood well in advance what the narrative was going to be here. We're probably going to see it when this film is released. It'll be interesting to see what this film does actually say and what it does portray, how much of the truth it has buried. But clearly, there's no way this film is going to highlight the fact that Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra was an absolute passionate Khalistani. He was a massive supporter of Khalistan. The facts bear that out. It will no doubt be utterly buried. He wasn't just an Indian activist for human rights. He was a Sikh activist. He was a Khalistani activist, active and campaigning for the human rights, the basic human rights of the Sikh community and the Khalistan movement. That is what he stood for. That is probably what this film will not represent, James. In other words, it will be a complete piece of Indian state misinformation.
Absolutely, Angus. And we can also even take it a step further in the fact that he also fought to represent and help to recognize the human rights abuses against other minorities as well. So as a Sikh, it was all about equality, about protecting others who may not have a voice in themselves. And, I think that when we've covered this story about this movie in the past, it's been a lot about the censorship and the regulators. And so it's going to be interesting to see what they had to cut. One of the other points that I noticed in the article was when they refer to it again as riots, not as a genocide. And again, that is trying to whitewash the extent of the atrocities that were committed against the Sikh people back in that era. So again, it's already started with the articles that come out in the fact that they're trying to downplay it by referring to it as riots instead of a genocide that it actually was. And, when he comes out and says, if I don't do it, somebody else was, well, that's just compromising his own ethics and his own principles, because of the fact that if you stand up and say no, it gives empowerment to others behind you to also turn it down. And that in itself makes a statement and raises some awareness, Angus.
Yeah, I think the huge irony there, as a reflection on his own character and a stain on his character, he is portraying one of the most heroic figures amongst many heroic figures, but certainly one of the most heroic figures who stood up to that sort of oppression in the Punjab. This Shahid Bhai Jaswant Singh Kalra, who's universally held up as an enormously brave, principled individual. This is an actor portraying that person, and he's betraying his own principles as a person to portray this actor. And the irony sits really appallingly, I would have to say, with that. So on that note, let's move on to our comments column. And of course, we have actually received a lot of comments about Diljit Dosanjh. I have picked just one or two about this because clearly I think the feelings seem to be, I would say, pretty much aligned amongst our audience about Diljit Dosanjh. Mukhtar Singh says it's the BJP who's blackmailing people like Dosanjh. Dosanjh is just playing along. Deep down, he's a Khalistani. Well, I don't know. Maybe deep down he is, but he's sold his soul. He's actually sold his soul for his dollar and his career, James. I think, as we talked about, it doesn't matter if he deep down is a Khalistani. He's not acting as a Khalistani. He's not standing up for his principles. He's basically, the fact he's a Khalistani is almost irrelevant if that's what he genuinely believes. He's certainly not. He's not talking the talk, as they say.
Exactly. And, we'll just have to watch and see how things are going. But at the same time, I definitely wouldn't put it beyond the concept or beyond reality of them using blackmail against anybody. So.
Yeah. And 1S1N2 follows the same theme. This comment says his profile has been deliberately elevated to be seen to represent Sikhs, mainly because he's subservient, absolutely, and he's not a practicing Sikh. So essentially what you're saying is he's an artificial construct, much like the film is and much like the Gaudiya media is. He himself is almost an artificial construct of the Indian state to try and represent what Sikhs are, but of course he doesn't. He claimed to support the farmers. He was happy to perform at Adani's child's wedding. Indeed, so the hypocrisy runs deep. He with the targeting of practicing Sikhs with a prison or death, it's hoped that unprincipled sellout Bollywood-type Punjabis will influence the youth away from the tenets and principles of Sikh. Yeah, and absolutely. I think this reflects what I've just said. This whole propaganda machine, which is recruiting people like Dosanjh, is again, it's to try and seduce the youth, the young generation, away from the principles, you say, the tenets and principles of Sikh, into this fake version of it, this Indian state-controlled model version of Sikh, and it's very insidious and it's very evil in many, many ways. Hardal Singh says, thanks to both the programme. Well, thank you for your comment. It would be appreciated if you can call for an interview with Jagmeet Singh, James. I think you answered this, didn't you?
Yeah, I have reached out several times to interview Jagmeet. With the change of events recently with Justin Trudeau stepping down, I will be reaching out again because I think that with the tide shifting, it definitely could be an ideal time for them to sit down and accept an interview and actually discuss the issues. So we'll definitely be looking at that in the very near future, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll keep trying and we will, of course, keep you posted on that. Satnam Singh says, again, same with Canadian politics, Canada still favoured Trudeau, but no one can make miracles. The Conservatives also don't have a magic leader. They certainly don't, certainly in the form of Polly Evra, who can do miracles. But NDP has a chance to win. Canada should bring NDP to power. Well, James, I think that's maybe a bit optimistic.
I think so. I think they've definitely, as I said in the past, have an opportunity to gain some seats, to gain some favor with the Canadian voters, but I don't think enough to put them in a position of either the Prime Minister's office or as the official opposition yet, but I would love to see it.
As would we all. But of course, stranger things have happened in politics. One thing about politics is it is predictably unpredictable. And who knows, but it's not impossible that actually the NDP could hold the balance of power. Of course, depending what happens, if there is a bit more of a hung parliament, then of course that's when the smaller parties actually have a disproportionate feeling of power. They actually could potentially control the balance of power in that. So we will see, and we can keep our fingers crossed. Amrit Saravar, here we go back to the spelling or pronunciation of Khalistan. It should be Khalistan, the land of the Khalsa, but I like the name Punjab better as it's easier to pronounce for everyone. So Punjab or Punjab, and then who knows? Well, we'll carry on as best we can, and apologies if we get it wrong, if you prefer Khalistan and Punjab, but you know what we mean anyway. Diljit Dosanjh is not a Sikh. He's just like Gurdas Man and Bhagwant Man. Absolutely, I think, Amrit, you're reiterating everything that we talked about. I think he's a fake Sikh. He is the creation of the Indian state, of what they think a Sikh should be. A good, loyal, indoctrinated Sikh, I think, is essentially what he's ended up being. Right, M. Verdi has said it's a shame that British police can be forced to work under pressure from the Indian government. Why can't the British police stand on their own principles? Once one of the best police forces in the world, it's become a puppet of the Indian government. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And actually the British police they've really lost an enormous amount of respect amongst the British population in recent years, and certainly the last decade or so. Because the problem is, and it really comes down to politicisation. In the old days, the good old days as we call them, the British police you could always rely and trust the police. Of course, there were always some bad apples, but generally, the British police force were an entity that you could trust and rely upon. They were independent, they were not political as such. They just enacted the law. They just they just ensured that we all stayed within the law. But unfortunately, and I think this has happened certainly since the Blair years, and I always point the finger of accusation at Tony Blair, he started it and he certainly accelerated it, is the politicisation of the judiciary and indeed the police force. And we do have a huge amount of political influence now in the police force, and this unfortunately has filtered down to the frontline police. And I have read so many comments from frontline policemen who have said, look, we just want to do our job. We join the police force just to be good citizens, to enact the law as it is written by the legislature. But in fact, they are controlled by senior management, who are in turn controlled by the politicians. And the politicians are clearly sending down that chain of command. This is what you must do. And we've seen this, not just in the Sikh community, we've seen it under freedom of speech. We've seen it in ridiculous areas, whether it's using the right pronouns or freedom of speech on social media. We've literally had people, there was a middle-aged, normal, middle-class white woman who was sent to prison for making a comment on Facebook. It wasn't even that provocative, but it was a comment on Facebook. She was visited by the police. She was then sent to prison. I mean, I'm sorry, we've got thousands of stabbings on a daily basis in our capital city, yet the police are focusing on people misgendering people on social media or writing slightly provocative comments on social media, etc. Likewise, and of course relevant back to the Sikh community, they are under pressure politically on other elements. And of course, the pressure coming from India, well, yes, the frontline police now are finding themselves having to tackle the Sikh community. Back in 2018, several members of the Khalistan movement, including Deepa Singh, their houses were raided by counter-terrorism units and by West Midlands police because they were activists and campaigning to free Jaggi and for the Khalistan movement. They've been harassed ever since because of their political activities, not because they're breaking the law, but because of their political activities. That is deeply wrong. That is deeply undemocratic. It flies actually in the face of the rule of law. It flies in the face of democracy, and it does highlight this very fact that the British police, unfortunately, now are being politicised to their detriment, to the detriment of British democracy, to the detriment of British society. All of us, not just the Sikh community, but all of us, whatever community you're in, this is not good for us here. Are you seeing this the same in Canada? Are you seeing any politicisation of the police force, the RCMP in Canada, for example, James?
Absolutely, Angus, and it's actually quite interesting in a transition right now. Where I live in the city of Surrey, it's one of the biggest cities in the province of British Columbia, and they have phased out, or in the tail end of phasing out, the RCMP as our police force for the city, and bringing in their own police force. So that is a huge transition. But it allows an opportunity for the city to dictate a new direction for policing in Surrey. So they are focused on hiring the best and the most qualified, but also to balance out the representation of the community, which of course is a very diverse one. So we're seeing a lot of Sikhs that are joining the Surrey Police Force because they want to give to the community, they want to protect the community, and they have that stability where with the RCMP they could be transferred to posts that are outside of their community or outside, they could be transferred to, Nunavut or up to the Arctic Circle. They don't know sometimes where they're going to be transferred. So this will give some stability for the community and for the new police force. And I hope that they don't take it to an extreme woke agenda and instead go back to, boots on the ground policing to make a difference. And that's something that the RCMP has been criticized for, is the politicization of the RCMP nationwide.
It's a deeply insidious danger to any democracy, this. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but basically, in any democracy, you have the legislature, that's the body that makes the laws, that's the politicians. Then you've got the executive, the law enforcement that actually enforces those laws. And then you've got the judiciary who sentence those who break those laws. Each of those three elements must remain completely independent. There must be no cross-fertilisation. They must not interfere in each other's parts. They have their own individual, independent roles to fulfil. And of course, they need interfaces between each of those, but ultimately they must remain independent. And of course, you then got the government, who are still subject to those same three bodies. But when that government and the politicians start interfering in the executive and the judiciary, that's when it all starts falling apart. That structure falls apart and democracy falls apart. That is what this is. This is symptomatic of a falling apart of democracy. Now, it's relatively low level, fortunately, but it's enough that it is symptomatic of a breakdown of democracy. This, of course, is happening on a regular basis in India, and we highlight this regularly, this breakdown between those three important entities of a democracy that were originally set up by the British, of course, in India, and India has carried it on. They've got those same three bodies. But here, even in the UK and clearly in Canada, we're seeing it. We are seeing that breakdown of those boundaries between those three entities. That is the fall of democracy. That is a breakdown, ultimately, of civilization. It really is as significant as that. That's why it must be stopped as soon as it appears. It must be nipped in the bud. So thank you. Anyway, Birdie, thank you for that comment. We've spent a lot of time on that one, but it was a very big topic. Think and Unite says, God, this is a big, really important comment. This God will be silent. God will silence the UK and racist Hindu governments in due course. Sikhs will never be silenced as they are God's children. This is important because your message is very clear. It's God ultimately who judges us all. Whatever your beliefs are, one day we will all face our makers. Whatever you believe in, we will all face that. And it is God, whatever God you support, who will ultimately control things and you will be answerable to. So if you're Hindutva, if you're Narendra Modi, you're the RSS or whatever, unfortunately, you are still answerable to that same God that we're all answerable to. So ultimately, as Think and Unite believes, it'll all come out in the wash, as we say in English, James.
Absolutely, and we have the same saying here. So it's all shake the tree and see what falls.
So, in other words, it's all going to work out in the end, and that's the sort of message I like. And then finally, right. Hinder Singh says, Khalistan Zindabad. Absolutely, we shall shout it from the rooftops. And one of our regular critics wades in. Vinny Chauhan says, in your dreams, with a laughing face. Well, Mit Singh replies, look, it will happen. Mark my words. In 3 years, Khalistan will be made and India will fall. Now, I'll tell you something, James. You asked me a year or two ago, I would have thought, I think that's a bit optimistic. I just can't see it happening. And I mentioned the other day about when I met Tony Mangat, the owner of Satellite TV. We had this very same conversation. He looked me squarely in the eye with his eyes blazing with passion. He said, it is going to happen, and it is going to happen in the next few years. He's absolutely convinced, because he said it is God's will. It is going to happen. He is absolutely convinced. And I have to say, and as I said the other day, everything I've seen over the last year or two actually makes me start to believe this very same thing. As you say, Mit Singh, it will happen. Mark my words. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen in 3 years, but it's not impossible. Khalistan will be made and India will fall. We're seeing an awful lot of things happening. And even when I was in Birmingham on Thursday, and I talked to a lot of very high-profile people in the Khalistan movement and indeed in the Sikh community as a whole, so many people said, look, what we're seeing at the moment is unprecedented. It is massive. There is a huge movement. There's a lot moving. There's a lot going on behind the scenes at governmental level, at a very high level, not just on the ground with the activists and the campaigners, but this has moved upwards now to the political spheres, to the United Nations level. This is how big it's getting. Things are happening, James. It is really realistic to believe that Khalistan could happen in the next few years.
Absolutely. And when he says in your dreams, I'd have to agree with him because, I'm a big guy. I like my food and I keep dreaming that we're going to have lunch in Khalistan in the next few years. A great meal.
Indeed.
I'm not able to dream about sex anymore. You just dream about good meals.
Indeed, and it is absolutely right. I think Vinny Chauhan, it really is in our dreams, and it's not just our dreams. It is going to be a realistic option. It is going to happen. It is going to happen, as Mit Singh says, it will happen potentially in the next 3 years. And what a great positive thought to end the show on once again. But thank you once again for all the comments. Do keep them coming in, whatever your thoughts are. If you've got any opinions or thoughts on any of our news items that we cover, let us know what you think about them. Likewise, keep those critical comments coming in. If you don't like or you totally disagree with what we're saying, let us know and explain why. It's always great fun to discuss those points and have a bit of banter with you as well. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com if there's anything you'd like to message us about directly. You don't want to put it in the public domain. But in the meantime, thank you so much once again for all your support. Thank you for watching Perspectives. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.